The crown gleams, a symbol of power and majesty. Yet history whispers a darker tale. Not all who wear the crown are worthy. Some reigns are etched in gold, others in blood. What transforms a king from a shepherd of his people to a wolf at their door? What distinguishes a just ruler from a tyrant? The answer lies not in lineage, but in the heart of the king. It is a heavy burden, the weight of a nation's hopes and dreams. Some rise to the challenge, their names etched in the annals of greatness. Others falter, their reigns becoming cautionary tales, grim reminders of the perils of unchecked power and misguided ambition. This is the story of England's worst kings, men whose reigns cast a long shadow over the nation's history. Through their failures, we gain a deeper understanding of the true cost of leadership and the enduring responsibility of power. Weakness is a serpent's tooth, slowly poisoning the body politic, eroding the very foundations of a stable and prosperous realm. A weak king is indecisive, easily swayed by advisors or worse, by fear. His lack of resolve makes him a puppet, manipulated by those around him. He lacks the fortitude to make difficult choices, often opting for appeasement over decisive action. This inability to stand firm leads to a loss of respect and authority. This breeds instability, as enemies sense vulnerability and allies question their commitments. The kingdom becomes a house of cards, ready to collapse at any moment. Cruelty is another mark of a bad king. A ruler who governs through fear and brutality alienates his subjects. A tyrant sees his subjects as pawns in his game of power, their lives expendable. His reign is a dark chapter in the kingdom's history. He rules through fear and oppression, his reign a litany of injustices. The people live in constant dread, their spirits crushed. Such a king sows the seeds of his own destruction, for cruelty breeds resentment, and resentment, in time, blossoms into rebellion. The oppressed will eventually rise. Incompetence, the final nail in the coffin of a reign, is often a quiet killer. It undermines the kingdom from within. An incompetent king may not be actively malicious, but his lack of vision, his poor judgment, and his inability to surround himself with capable advisors lead to stagnation and decline. The kingdom suffers from his ineptitude. His reign is marked by missed opportunities, bungled policies, and a general sense of drift. The once thriving kingdom slowly withers away, a shadow of its former glory. History offers a rogues gallery of monarchs who embody these failings. Edward the Confessor, though a pious man, was utterly unsuited for the throne. He lacked the stomach for warfare, leaving England vulnerable to Viking raids. His indecisiveness in naming an heir plunged the kingdom into chaos upon his death. Ethelred the Unready, true to his name, proved utterly incapable of dealing with the renewed Viking threat. His reign was a disastrous cycle of Danegeld payments and brutal Viking reprisals. His lack of foresight and military acumen cost England dearly and set the stage for the Danish conquest under Canute the Great. These kings, though different in temperament, shared a fatal flaw: weakness. They were ill-equipped to bear the mantle of kingship, and their reigns serve as stark warnings against elevating sentiment or piety above the hard realities of leadership. If weakness is a slow poison, then cruelty is a raging fire, consuming all in its path. King John, forever infamous for his role in the Magna Carta saga, exemplifies the perils of unchecked power. Driven by avarice and paranoia, he ruthlessly exploited his subjects, threw the kingdom into turmoil to hold on to his French territories, and earned the hatred of both the nobility and the common folk. Richard II, though initially promising, descended into a paranoid spiral of tyranny. He ruthlessly eliminated his opponents, confiscated estates on flimsy pretexts, and ruled with an iron fist. His actions sparked widespread rebellion, culminating in his deposition and eventual murder. These kings, each in their own way, illustrate the corrosive nature of absolute power. They forgot that true authority derives not from fear, but from the consent of the governed. Their reigns stand as grim testaments to the dangers of unchecked ambition and the seductive allure of tyranny. Section 5, A Legacy of Ashes, the Impact of Bad Kings. The consequences of bad leadership are far-reaching and devastating. A weak king invites invasion and weakens the kingdom's standing on the world stage. A cruel king sows the seeds of discord and rebellion, leaving his realm fractured and vulnerable. An incompetent king presides over stagnation and decline, squandering opportunities and eroding the nation's prosperity. The reigns of England's worst kings left indelible scars on the nation's psyche. They eroded trust in the monarchy, fueled instability, and hampered England's progress. The scars of these reigns are visible in the laws enacted to curtail royal power, in the enduring suspicion of absolute monarchy, and in the constant struggle to find the delicate balance between authority and liberty. Section 6. John, a king beset by strife and rebellion. John's reign was marked by a series of disastrous conflicts and political blunders. His inability to maintain control over his territories and his poor decision-making led to widespread discontent. His military campaigns in France ended in humiliating defeat, culminating in the loss of Normandy in 1204. This loss was not just a territorial setback, but a significant blow to the English crown's prestige and influence in Europe. This loss, a devastating blow to English prestige, fueled resentment against John's rule. The nobility and common folk alike began to question his leadership and capability as a monarch. His constant need for funds to finance his wars and lavish lifestyle led him to levy exorbitant taxes on his barons, further straining relations with the very men who were supposed to be his staunchest supporters. These heavy taxes crippled the economy and caused widespread suffering among the populace. John's autocratic tendencies and blatant disregard for feudal customs alienated the powerful baronial class, pushing them to the brink of rebellion. His refusal to consult with his barons and his arbitrary rule created a climate of distrust and anger. The final straw came in 1215, when a group of powerful barons, fed up with John's tyranny, forced him to sign the Magna Carta, a document enshrining certain fundamental rights and limiting the king's power. This historic event marked a turning point in the relationship between the monarchy and its subjects. Though John violated the Magna Carta almost immediately, it became a cornerstone of English law and a powerful symbol of the limits of royal authority. Its legacy endured, influencing the development of constitutional law and the principles of governance for centuries to come. Section 7. Edward II, a king ill-suited for the throne. Edward II's reign, a stark contrast to his father's martial prowess, was plagued by political intrigue, military failures, and the shadow of his favourites. His inability to command respect from his barons and his lack of strategic vision made his rule tumultuous and unstable. Unlike the warrior King Edward I, Edward II displayed little interest in the affairs of state or the rigours of war. He preferred leisure and personal indulgences over the responsibilities of kingship, which alienated many of his subjects. He surrounded himself with a small circle of favourites, showering them with titles and lands, much to the resentment of the powerful barons. This favouritism led to widespread discontent and weakened his authority. His reign saw the disastrous defeat at Bannockburn in 1314, which secured Scottish independence and further tarnished Edward's already shaky reputation. This defeat was a significant blow to English prestige and military strength. His inability to control his favourites, his disastrous military decisions, and his detachment from the concerns of his subjects ultimately led to his downfall. The barons' frustration grew, leading to increased opposition and rebellion. Edward II's deposition in 1327, a brutal affair orchestrated by his own wife and her lover, Roger Mortimer, marked a pivotal moment in English history. This betrayal from within his own family underscored the depth of his failures. It served as a stark warning to future monarchs that even the most divinely ordained kings could be brought low by their own failings. Edward II's tragic reign remains a cautionary tale of how personal weaknesses can undermine a kingdom. Section 8. A kingdom adrift, the consequences of incompetence. The reigns of John and Edward II illustrate the devastating impact of bad leadership on England's fortunes. John's tyranny and military misadventures led to the loss of English possessions in France, sowed the seeds of discontent that would later erupt in the Barons' War, and ultimately forced the Crown to acknowledge the limits of its power. Edward II's inept rule and his reliance on favourites allowed Scotland to secure its independence, weakened England's position on the European stage, and led to a period of political instability that would have lasting repercussions for the kingdom. These kings, though vastly different in personality and temperament, shared a common legacy: They left England weaker, more divided and vulnerable to both internal strife and external threats. Section 9. The enduring lesson, a warning from history. The reigns of England's worst kings offer valuable lessons for all who wield power. They remind us that leadership is not a birthright but a sacred trust, demanding courage, wisdom, and a commitment to the welfare of the governed. They warn us that unchecked power corrupts, that cruelty begets rebellion, and that incompetence can be as devastating as malice. These historical figures, forever etched in the tapestry of England's past, serve as cautionary tales, reminding us that the price of bad leadership is paid not just by the ruler, but by the nation itself. The legacy of their reigns is a stark reminder of the fragility of power and the enduring importance of good governance. King John of England. Few names in English history evoke such visceral reactions. He is remembered as a villain, a tyrant, a king who lost his crown and nearly destroyed his kingdom. John's reign, from 1199 to 1216, was a tumultuous period marked by rebellion, war, and the dramatic curtailment of royal power. His story, however, is not simply one of a bad king making bad decisions. It is a complex tale of ambition, miscalculation, and the shifting power dynamics between the monarchy and the nobility. John was the youngest son of Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine, a formidable couple who had reshaped the political landscape of Europe. Born in 1166, John was his mother's favourite, but he was not in line to inherit the English throne. His elder brothers, Henry, Richard, and Geoffrey, stood before him. However, fate, as it often does, had other plans. Henry died young, Richard perished on crusade, and Geoffrey met an untimely end. John, the unlikely heir, became King of England in 1199. His reign began with promise. John was an intelligent and capable ruler, known for his sharp wit and administrative skills. His volatile personality and ruthless methods quickly alienated his barons, the powerful nobles who formed the backbone of English society. The Duchy of Normandy, a sprawling region in northern France, had been a jewel in the English crown for centuries. Its acquisition by William the Conqueror in 1066 had fundamentally reshaped English history, forging a powerful Anglo-Norman realm that straddled the English Channel. For John, however, Normandy would become a poisoned chalice, a symbol of his greatest failure. The loss of Normandy can be attributed to a complex web of factors, including John's own miscalculations and the cunning of his arch-rival, King Philip II of France. John's marriage to Isabella of Angoulême in 1200, while politically expedient, proved to be a diplomatic disaster. Isabella was already betrothed to Hugh of Lusignan, a powerful Poitevin noble, and the marriage enraged the Lusignans, who appealed to Philip for justice. Philip, ever the opportunist, saw a chance to strike at the heart of the Angevin Empire. He summoned John to his court to answer for his actions, but John, arrogant and dismissive, refused to appear. Philip, using this as a pretext, declared John a contumacious vassal and launched a military campaign to seize Normandy. By 1204, Rouen, the Norman capital, had fallen, and John was forced to flee back to England in disgrace. The loss of Normandy was a devastating blow to John's prestige and a financial catastrophe for the crown. The vast revenues from Norman lands, which had flowed into the royal treasury for generations, were gone. John, desperate to replenish his coffers and rebuild his military strength, turned to his English subjects, imposing a series of crushing taxes and levies that would further alienate his barons and sow the seeds of rebellion. John's fiscal policies were both rapacious and arbitrary. He levied scutages, feudal dues traditionally paid by knights in lieu of military service, with unprecedented frequency and at exorbitant rates. He demanded huge sums from towns and cities, crippling trade and commerce. He imposed new taxes on everything from marriages and inheritances to the wool trade, the lifeblood of the English economy. John's methods of tax collection were as ruthless as the taxes themselves. The king's relentless pursuit of revenue created a climate of fear and resentment that permeated every level of English society. The heavy burden of taxation, coupled with John's tyrannical rule and his humiliating defeat in France, ignited a firestorm of dissent among the English barons. These powerful nobles, accustomed to a certain level of influence and autonomy, chafed under John's oppressive regime. They resented his arbitrary use of power, his disregard for their feudal rights, and his constant demands for money. Opposition to John's rule grew steadily throughout the first 2 decades of the 13th century. Barons began to withdraw their support for the king, refusing to provide him with troops or money. They met in secret, plotting ways to curb the king's power and protect their own interests. The atmosphere in England was becoming increasingly volatile, a powder keg waiting for a spark. Adding fuel to the fire was John's conflict with the church. In 1209, Pope Innocent III excommunicated John after a dispute over the appointment of the Archbishop of Canterbury. The kingdom was on the brink of chaos. The year 1215 marked a turning point in English history. In June of that year, after months of simmering tension and open rebellion, John met with a group of his most powerful barons at Runnymede, a meadow near Windsor Castle. The barons, united in their opposition to the king's rule, presented John with a document that would come to be known as the Magna Carta, the Great Charter. The Magna Carta was not a revolution, but it was a profound assertion of the rights and liberties of the ruled against the ruler. It was not a single law, but a collection of clauses, 63 in total, that addressed a wide range of grievances, from feudal rights and the administration of justice to the regulation of trade and the protection of church property. At the heart of the Magna Carta was the principle that even the king was subject to the law. John, facing the very real threat of civil war, reluctantly agreed to the barons' demands and affixed his seal to the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta did not end the conflict between John and his barons, but it established a principle that would resonate through the centuries. Section 6. Challenging the royal word, the First Barons' War. The signing of the Magna Carta, while a landmark event, did not usher in an era of peace and harmony. John, despite his initial acquiescence, had no intention of abiding by the Charter's provisions. He viewed it as an intolerable infringement on his royal prerogative, a humiliation forced upon him by rebellious barons. As soon as the opportunity arose, he reneged on his word, plunging England into a bitter civil war known as the First Barons' War. John appealed to his most powerful ally, Pope Innocent III, for support. The Pope, siding with the king against his rebellious subjects, declared the Magna Carta null and void. With the backing of Rome, John unleashed his forces, determined to crush the baronial opposition and reassert his authority over the kingdom. The barons, anticipating John's treachery, had been preparing for war. The war that ensued was a brutal and chaotic affair, marked by siege warfare, skirmishes, and shifting alliances. Section 7. A Kingdom in Chaos. The French Invasion. As the First Barons' War raged, a new threat emerged to compound John's woes: the French. King Philip II, seeing an opportunity to further weaken his Angevin rival and perhaps even claim the English crown for himself, threw his support behind the rebellious barons. In 1216, a French army under the command of Philip's son, Louis, landed in England. The arrival of the French transformed the conflict from a baronial rebellion into a full-blown invasion. Louis, welcomed by John's enemies as a liberator, quickly captured London and other key towns. John, facing enemies on multiple fronts and with his authority crumbling, was in a precarious position. His kingdom was in chaos, his treasury depleted, and his grip on power slipping away. Despite his dire circumstances, John continued to fight. His health, never robust, began to fail under the immense strain of war and rebellion. Section 8. Death of a King, Legacy of Discontent. In October 1216, while on campaign in eastern England, King John contracted dysentery, a debilitating and often fatal intestinal disease. He died on October 19th at Newark Castle in Nottinghamshire, leaving his 9-year-old son, Henry III, as his heir. John's death, while not unexpected given his declining health, sent shockwaves through the kingdom. The tyrant king, the reviled monarch who had lost Normandy, fought with his barons and been excommunicated by the Pope, was no more. John's passing did little to quell the chaos that had engulfed England. The First Barons' War continued, with the French still occupying large parts of the country. It would take several more years, and the death of Louis's father, Philip II, before peace was finally restored. Henry III, a mere child when he ascended the throne, inherited a kingdom scarred by war, divided by faction, and burdened by debt. John's reign, though brief and tumultuous, left an enduring mark on English history. Section 9 Conclusion. John's enduring impact. King John's reign, though marked by turmoil and failure, remains a pivotal chapter in English history. His loss of Normandy, coupled with his oppressive rule, ignited a firestorm of dissent that culminated in the creation of the Magna Carta. This landmark document, a testament to the enduring power of law and the limits of royal authority, continues to resonate centuries later. While often vilified as a tyrant, John's reign serves as a stark reminder of the delicate balance between ruler and ruled. His failures ultimately paved the way for a more equitable distribution of power, laying the groundwork for the development of parliamentary democracy in England. Edward II became king in 1307. He ascended to the throne at a time when the kingdom was in a state of transition, following the death of his formidable father, Edward III. The young king's coronation was a grand affair filled with hope and anticipation for a prosperous reign. He was young and handsome, embodying the ideal image of a medieval monarch. His striking appearance and regal bearing made him a popular figure among the common people who saw in him the promise of a bright future. His father, Edward I, was a legend. Known as Longshanks and Hammer of the Scots, Edward I was a towering figure in English history, both literally and figuratively. His reign was marked by military conquests and a relentless drive to expand and consolidate his kingdom. Edward I was a warrior king. He led his troops into battle with a fierce determination, earning a reputation as one of the most formidable military leaders of his time. His campaigns in Wales and Scotland were particularly notable, leaving a lasting impact on the British Isles. He conquered Wales and Scotland. His victory at the Battle of Falkirk in 1298 was a significant milestone, demonstrating his military prowess and strategic acumen. The subjugation of Wales and the ongoing conflicts in Scotland were testaments to his ambition and strength. People expected Edward II to be like his father. They were quickly disappointed. Unlike his father, Edward II lacked the same martial spirit and strategic vision. His interests lay elsewhere, and this divergence from his father's path soon became apparent to all. Edward was not interested in war. He found solace and joy in the arts, particularly music and poetry. These pursuits, while noble in their own right, were seen as frivolous by the warrior class that had thrived under his father's rule. He preferred music and poetry. The court of Edward II was filled with musicians, poets and artists, creating an atmosphere of cultural refinement. However, this focus on the arts did little to endear him to the military elite and the powerful barons who expected a king to lead them in battle. He surrounded himself with favorites. These were individuals who shared his interests and provided him with companionship and support. However, their influence over the king was viewed with suspicion and resentment by the traditional power brokers of the realm. These favorites were not warriors or nobles. They were often men of lower birth whose rise to prominence was seen as an affront to the established order. Their presence at court and their sway over the king created a rift between Edward II and the nobility. The most controversial was Piers Gaveston. Gaveston's close relationship with the king and his rapid ascent to power made him a target of envy and animosity. His influence over Edward II was profound, and many saw him as the true power behind the throne. Edward's reign began to crumble. The kingdom was plagued by internal strife and external threats. The king's inability to assert his authority and the growing discontent among the nobility led to a period of instability and turmoil. England was at war with Scotland. The ongoing conflict drained the kingdom's resources and further exposed the weaknesses of Edward II's leadership. His failure to achieve decisive victories only added to the growing sense of disillusionment. There was unrest at home. The common people, burdened by taxes and suffering from the effects of war, began to voice their discontent. Rebellions and uprisings became more frequent, adding to the king's woes. The powerful barons watched Edward. They were the kingmakers and power brokers of the realm, and their support was crucial for any monarch. However, their patience with Edward II was wearing thin. They did not like what they saw. The king's reliance on his favorites, his lack of military success, and his perceived neglect of the kingdom's needs led to growing discontent among the barons. They began to plot and scheme, seeking ways to curb the king's power. The stage was set for a tragic clash of wills. The tension between Edward II and the barons would eventually lead to a series of confrontations that would shape the future of the kingdom. The young king, once full of promise, now faced a battle for his very survival. In 1314, Edward II faced Robert the Bruce at Bannockburn. The English army was huge. They were confident of victory. But Bruce had a plan. The Scottish army was outnumbered. They were fighting for their freedom. They fought with incredible ferocity. The English were routed. It was a humiliating defeat. Scotland was lost. Edward's reputation was shattered. The defeat had serious consequences. The English barons were furious. They blamed Edward's incompetence. They also blamed Piers Gaveston. Piers Gaveston was Edward's closest companion. He was handsome and charming. He was also arrogant and ambitious. Edward showered Gaveston with gifts and titles. He even made him Earl of Cornwall. The barons were outraged. They saw Gaveston as a symbol of Edward's weakness. They believed Gaveston was manipulating the king. They demanded Gaveston's removal. Edward refused. He would not be parted from his favourite. This defiance only made the barons angrier. They began to plot against Edward. The situation was becoming increasingly dangerous. The barons, led by the Earl of Lancaster, rose up against Edward. They captured Gaveston and executed him in 1312. Edward was heartbroken and enraged, but he was powerless to stop them. The lords continued to exert their power. They forced Edward to agree to a series of reforms. These reforms limited the king's power. The lords were now the real rulers of England. Edward was humiliated. He wanted revenge. He would never forgive the barons for killing Gaveston. He began to plot his own revenge. Edward was married to Isabella of France. She was a powerful woman. She had her own ambitions. At first she supported her husband, but Edward's behavior changed her. Edward took new favorites. He neglected Isabella. He ignored her advice. He even took her lands and gave them to his new favorites. Isabella felt betrayed and humiliated. She allied herself with the barons. She raised an army and invaded England. Her aim was to overthrow her husband. And she had a powerful weapon, her son, the young Prince Edward. Section 6. Imprisonment and Despair. Isabella's invasion was successful. Edward's forces deserted him. He was captured and imprisoned in Kenilworth Castle. His reign was over. Edward was forced to abdicate in favour of his son. The young Edward III was now king. But Isabella was the real power behind the throne. Edward II was a broken man. He had lost his throne, his power, and his freedom. He was a prisoner in his own country. But his ordeal was far from over. Section 7. The gruesome end of a king. Edward was moved from castle to castle. He was kept in harsh conditions. His captors feared he would escape and rally support. In 1327, Edward met his end in Berkeley Castle. The exact circumstances of his death are unclear. However, the most common account is chilling. It is said that Edward was murdered on Isabella's orders. The method of his death was particularly gruesome. A red-hot poker was inserted into his anus. It was a brutal and agonizing death. It is said that his screams could be heard for miles around. Section 8. Legacy of a Fallen King. Edward II's reign was a disaster. His rule was fraught with turmoil and strife, a period marked by significant upheaval and conflict. From the very beginning, Edward struggled to assert his authority, facing opposition from powerful nobles and a kingdom in disarray. He was a weak and indecisive king. His inability to make firm decisions and his constant vacillation made him an easy target for manipulation. His court was filled with intrigue and betrayal, as those around him sought to exploit his weaknesses for their own gain. He was easily manipulated by his favorites. These favorites, often chosen for their loyalty rather than their competence, wielded significant influence over the king, leading to widespread resentment among the nobility. This favoritism further destabilized his reign, causing rifts and divisions within the court. His reign was marked by rebellion and defeat. The discontent among the nobles and the common people alike led to numerous uprisings. These rebellions were often brutally suppressed, but they left a lasting scar on the kingdom, weakening its structure and morale. He lost Scotland and brought England to the brink of civil war. The Battle of Bannockburn in 1314 was a catastrophic defeat for Edward, resulting in the loss of Scotland and a significant blow to his credibility. This defeat emboldened his enemies and further eroded his authority. However, Edward was also a victim of his circumstances. The political landscape of the time was incredibly volatile, and even a stronger king would have struggled to maintain control. Edward's personal failings were exacerbated by the turbulent environment in which he ruled. He was a weak king in a time of strong nobles. The barons and lords of the realm were powerful and ambitious, often more interested in their own gain than the stability of the kingdom. They saw Edward's weakness as an opportunity to expand their own power and influence. He was constantly undermined and betrayed. Those closest to him, including his own family, often plotted against him. This constant state of paranoia and mistrust made it nearly impossible for Edward to govern effectively. His death was brutal and unjust. In 1327, Edward was deposed and later murdered in a particularly gruesome manner. His death marked the end of a tragic and tumultuous reign, leaving a legacy of failure and sorrow. Edward II's story is a tragedy. It is a tale of a king who was ill-suited for the throne, whose reign was marred by conflict and betrayal, and whose life ended in violence and despair. It is a story of love, betrayal, and revenge. The personal relationships and political machinations that defined Edward's reign are a testament to the complexities of medieval power dynamics. It is a story that has resonated through the centuries. The legacy of Edward II serves as a poignant reminder of the perils of weak leadership and the enduring impact of historical events on the present. Section 9, Edward II in Drama and History. Edward II's life has inspired countless plays, films, and books. His tumultuous reign and personal struggles have provided rich material for storytellers across the centuries. From the Elizabethan era to modern times, his story has been retold in various forms, each adding its own interpretation and nuance to the historical figure. Christopher Marlowe's play Edward II is one of the most famous. Written in the late 16th century, Marlowe's work delves deep into the complexities of Edward's character, portraying him as a tragic figure torn between his duties as a king and his personal desires. The play has been praised for its bold exploration of themes that were considered taboo at the time. It explores the themes of love, power, and betrayal. Marlowe's depiction of Edward's relationship with his favourite, Piers Gaveston, and the subsequent political fallout highlights the intense personal and political conflicts that defined Edward's reign. The play's dramatic scenes and powerful dialogues have captivated audiences for centuries. Edward II remains a controversial figure. His reign was marked by internal strife, military defeats, and political intrigue. Despite his many challenges, Edward's story continues to fascinate historians and dramatists alike. His life serves as a poignant reminder of the complexities of leadership and the often harsh realities of medieval politics. Some historians argue that he was not as incompetent as he is often portrayed. They suggest that Edward's failures were not solely due to his own shortcomings, but were also influenced by the turbulent times in which he lived. The constant power struggles and shifting alliances of the medieval period made it difficult for any ruler to maintain stability. They point to his early successes in Scotland. Edward's initial campaigns showed promise, and he managed to secure some victories. However, these early successes were overshadowed by later defeats and the growing discontent among his nobles. The challenges of ruling a divided kingdom proved to be too great for Edward to overcome. They also argue that he was a victim of his time. The political landscape of medieval England was fraught with danger and uncertainty. Edward's reliance on favourites and his inability to navigate the treacherous waters of court politics ultimately led to his downfall. His story is a testament to the difficulties faced by medieval monarchs. However, most historians agree that Edward II was a weak and ineffective king. His inability to assert his authority and manage his kingdom's affairs led to widespread unrest and rebellion. The nobles' dissatisfaction with his rule culminated in his eventual deposition and imprisonment. His reign was a disaster for England. The country was plagued by internal conflicts, economic difficulties, and military defeats. Edward's failure to provide strong leadership left England vulnerable to external threats and internal divisions. His reign is often cited as a period of decline and instability in English history. His death was a tragic end to a troubled life. Edward was eventually captured and forced to abdicate in favour of his son, Edward III. He was imprisoned and later murdered under mysterious circumstances. His death marked the end of a reign that had been fraught with difficulties and challenges. Edward II's story is a reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of strong leadership. His life and reign continue to be studied and debated by historians, offering valuable insights into the complexities of medieval politics and the challenges of kingship. The legacy of Edward II serves as a cautionary tale for future generations. Richard II ascended to the throne of England in 1377 following the death of his grandfather Edward III. He was just 10 years old, a mere child thrust into the complexities of ruling a kingdom. Young Richard inherited a kingdom already feeling the strain of constant war with France and widespread plague, known as the Black Death. He also inherited the deeply ingrained belief that kings were appointed by God, a notion that was widely accepted at the time. This belief, known as the divine right of kings, shaped Richard's view of himself and his reign, making him see his rule as divinely sanctioned.
I am God's chosen ruler on earth, destined to lead my people.
This belief fueled a sense of arrogance and entitlement in the young king. It made him resistant to advice or criticism from his advisors and courtiers. Richard's lavish court and extravagant spending further alienated the common people, who saw their king living in opulence. While the king and his nobles lived in luxury, the majority of the population struggled to survive, facing poverty and hardship. The gap between the king and his subjects grew wider with each passing year, creating a deep divide. The belief in divine right made Richard inflexible and unwilling to compromise on matters of governance. He saw any challenge to his authority as a challenge to God's will, which he believed was unassailable. This made him appear out of touch and unconcerned with the plight of his people, further isolating him from those he ruled. In 1381, England erupted in rebellion. The country was in turmoil, with peasants rising up against the oppressive rule of the monarchy. The Peasants' Revolt, as it became known, was a direct result of Richard's policies and his detachment from the realities of life outside the royal court. His decisions had alienated the very people he was supposed to protect. The revolt was fueled by years of oppression, poverty, and a new poll tax that fell heavily on the poorest in society. This tax was seen as the final straw, pushing the peasants to their breaking point.
We demand an end to the poll tax, fairer treatment, and an audience with the king. Our voices must be heard and our grievances addressed.
Thousands of peasants, led by figures like Wat Tyler and John Ball, marched on London. Their determination was unwavering, and their numbers grew as they advanced. The rebels' anger and frustration boiled over. They were no longer willing to accept their dire circumstances without a fight. They burned buildings, attacked tax collectors, and even stormed the Tower of London. Their actions were a clear message of defiance against the ruling class. Richard, still a teenager, was forced to confront the angry mob. The young king found himself in a precarious position. Facing the wrath of his subjects, he met with the rebels and, under duress, agreed to their demands. It was a tense negotiation, with the king trying to placate the furious crowd. This act, however, was a temporary measure to quell the uprising. The uneasy peace that followed was fragile and short-lived. Once the revolt subsided, Richard reneged on his promises. The peasants felt betrayed, their hopes for change dashed. He ordered the execution of the rebel leaders and ruthlessly crushed any remaining opposition. The crackdown was brutal, leaving a lasting scar on the peasantry. The Peasants' Revolt marked a turning point in Richard's reign. It was a significant event that highlighted the deep divisions within the kingdom. It exposed his vulnerability and the growing discontent among his subjects. The revolt was a stark reminder of the power of the people when pushed to their limits. As Richard matured, so too did his ruthlessness. He became increasingly paranoid, seeing enemies and rivals lurking in every shadow. He surrounded himself with a small circle of loyal advisors, but alienated many powerful nobles. Richard's methods for dealing with opposition became increasingly brutal.
Execute those who dare to question my authority.
He ordered the executions of several prominent nobles who dared to question his authority. Others were driven into exile, stripped of their lands and titles.
I am exiled, my lands and titles taken. Richard will pay for this.
While these actions eliminated immediate threats, they came at a high cost. Richard's actions created a growing number of enemies, both within England and abroad. His court, once a place of vibrancy and debate, became a hollow shell, filled with fear and suspicion. Richard's reign, instead of being characterized by strength and stability, was descending into an atmosphere of paranoia and fear. In 1398, Richard made a fateful decision that would seal his fate. He exiled Henry Bolingbroke, Duke of Hereford, and one of the most powerful nobles in the land. Bolingbroke, later known as Henry II, was the son of John of Gaunt, the Duke of Lancaster and Richard's own uncle. While exile was meant to neutralize Bolingbroke, it had the opposite effect. It provided him with the opportunity to gather support and plot his return. Bolingbroke's exile became a rallying point for those discontented with Richard's rule.
Richard has taken my inheritance. This will not stand.
When John of Gaunt died in 1399, Richard seized the Duchy of Lancaster for the crown, denying Bolingbroke his rightful inheritance. This act of seizing the lands was seen as a blatant overreach of royal power. This act was a grave miscalculation. It alienated many powerful nobles who saw Richard's actions as a threat to their own inheritances. The discontent among the nobility grew. With the support of these disgruntled nobles and growing popular discontent with Richard's rule, Bolingbroke returned to England in July 1399. He landed in Yorkshire with a small force, but his return quickly gained momentum, transforming into a full-blown rebellion against Richard II. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation that would change the course of English history.
Bolingbroke's return to England took me by surprise.
The king was in Ireland at the time, attempting to quell unrest there. This left him vulnerable and unable to respond effectively to the growing rebellion in his own country. By the time Richard returned to England, Bolingbroke had already seized control of much of the country.
Isolated and abandoned by former allies, I found myself trapped in Conwy Castle in Wales. I was forced to negotiate with Bolingbroke, who had the support of the people and the nobility.
Under duress, and with the promise of his life being spared, Richard agreed to abdicate the throne. He formally relinquished the crown on September 29, 1399. This marked the end of his reign and the beginning of the House of Lancaster on the English throne. Following his abdication, Richard was imprisoned in various castles, eventually ending up in Pontefract Castle in Yorkshire. Pontefract, a formidable stronghold with a dark history, became Richard's final prison.
While accounts of my imprisonment vary, it is clear that I was kept in harsh conditions. I was denied any comforts befitting a former king and was kept isolated from the outside world.
The circumstances surrounding his death remain shrouded in mystery. Officially, Richard died on February 14, 1400 at Pontefract Castle. The official account of Richard's death claimed he died of self-starvation, refusing to eat in his grief and despair. However, contemporary chronicles and historical accounts offer conflicting versions of events.
Some suggested that I was murdered, possibly starved to death, or even suffocated.
Henry IV, eager to secure his own claim to the throne, had a clear motive for wanting Richard dead. A living Richard represented a potential rallying point for rebellion, a threat to Henry's newly established reign. Despite the lack of conclusive evidence, the rumors of murder persisted.
Shakespeare, in his play Richard II, popularized the theory that I was murdered at Pontefract on Henry's orders.
The exact circumstances of Richard's death may forever remain a mystery, adding another layer of tragedy to the story of the deposed king. Richard II's reign, though ultimately ending in failure, left a lasting impact on English history. He is often remembered as an indecisive and arrogant ruler, blinded by his belief in divine right and detached from the needs of his people. His inability to effectively deal with the peasants' revolt, his ruthlessness towards rivals, and his political miscalculations ultimately led to his downfall. Richard's deposition marked the beginning of a turbulent period in English history. with the House of Lancaster's claim to the throne challenged by the Wars of the Roses in the following century. Yet Richard II was also a complex and tragic figure. He was a patron of the arts, known for his refined tastes and his role in the development of Middle English literature. His reign, though marked by turmoil and ultimately failure, serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of absolute power, the importance of understanding the needs of the governed, and the ever-present threat to authority in an ever-changing world. A kingdom needs a king, not just a figurehead to wear the crown, but a true ruler who embodies the spirit and strength of the realm. A king must be more than a symbol. He must be the very heart and soul of his kingdom. Not just a man to wear the crown, but a ruler, a leader who can inspire loyalty and command respect, someone who can make the hard decisions and stand firm in the face of adversity. A king must be strong, decisive, and wise. He must possess the courage to lead his men into battle, and the wisdom to know when to seek peace. His strength must be both physical and moral, guiding his people through times of prosperity and hardship alike. He must command the respect of his people and the fear of his enemies. His presence alone should be enough to deter those who would threaten his kingdom. A king's authority must be unquestionable, his resolve unbreakable. When a king is weak, his kingdom suffers. The land becomes vulnerable to invasion, the people lose faith, and chaos reigns. A feeble king can bring about the downfall of even the most prosperous realm. England learned this lesson the hard way with Henry VI. His reign was marked by indecision and a lack of leadership, leading to turmoil and strife. Born into the maelstrom of the 100 Years' War, Henry VI ascended the throne as a mere babe. His early years were overshadowed by the conflict that had already ravaged his kingdom. Henry VI ascended the throne as a mere babe. He was thrust into a position of immense responsibility before he could even comprehend the weight of the crown he wore. He inherited a legacy of conflict and a kingdom already weary from generations of battle. The people were tired, the land was scarred, and the future seemed uncertain. Yet the true tragedy of Henry VI lay not in the circumstances of his birth, but in the man himself. Despite his noble lineage, he lacked the qualities that make a great king. He was a gentle soul, pious and compassionate, but these virtues did not translate well to the ruthless game of power. His kindness was seen as weakness, his piety as naivety, but these virtues did not translate well to the ruthless game of power. In a court filled with intrigue and ambition, Henry's gentle nature was a liability. Henry VI was a man of God in a world that demanded a warrior. His faith was his guiding light, but it left him ill-equipped to deal with the harsh realities of kingship. He lacked the iron will, the political cunning, and the decisiveness that had characterized his ancestors. His inability to make firm decisions led to a power vacuum that others were all too eager to fill. He was a lamb among wolves, utterly unprepared for the burdens of kingship. His reign was plagued by internal strife and external threats, and he was unable to navigate the treacherous waters of medieval politics. His reign, therefore, became a chronicle of missed opportunities, disastrous decisions, and ultimately the descent of England into a vortex of chaos and bloodshed. The kingdom that had once been a beacon of strength and stability was now a land of turmoil and despair, all because of the perils of a feeble king. The 100 Years' War, a brutal and protracted conflict between England and France, loomed large over Henry VI's reign. This war, which spanned over a century, was not a single continuous conflict, but rather a series of battles, truces, and renewed hostilities. It was a war that shaped the destinies of both nations and left an indelible mark on European history. It was a war he inherited, a war he never desired, and a war that would ultimately break him. Henry VI ascended to the throne as an infant, and his early years were marked by regency and the decisions of others. As he grew older, the weight of the crown and the ongoing conflict began to take a toll on his mental and emotional well-being. Henry VI, the man of peace, found himself thrust into the role of a warlord, a role for which he was woefully unsuited. His gentle nature and preference for diplomacy over warfare made him ill-equipped to lead a nation embroiled in such a relentless and violent struggle. His inability to inspire confidence in his military leaders and subjects further exacerbated the situation. Under Henry VI's reign, England's fortunes in the war began to wane. The once dominant English forces, who had secured significant victories under his father, Henry V, started to experience a series of setbacks. The morale of the English troops dwindled as they faced continuous defeats and the harsh realities of prolonged warfare. The English victories that had characterized his father's reign gave way to a string of defeats. The loss of key territories and the inability to maintain control over conquered lands signaled a turning point in the war. The English army, once feared and respected, now struggled to hold its ground against a resurgent French force. The French, inspired by the enigmatic Joan of Arc, rallied against the English invaders. Joan's presence on the battlefield was a game-changer. Her visions and unwavering faith galvanized the French troops, instilling in them a renewed sense of purpose and determination. She became a beacon of hope for a nation desperate to reclaim its sovereignty. Joan of Arc, a peasant girl turned warrior saint, became a symbol of French resistance and a thorn in the side of the English. Her leadership and bravery in battle inspired not only soldiers but also the common people of France. Her rise from obscurity to prominence was nothing short of miraculous, and her impact on the war was profound. The loss of Joan of Arc at the stake, condemned as a heretic by the English, did little to stem the tide of French resurgence. Her martyrdom only strengthened the resolve of the French people, who saw her as a divine figure sent to deliver them from their oppressors. The momentum she had generated continued to drive the French forces forward. The English, demoralized and lacking decisive leadership, found themselves on the defensive. The once aggressive campaigns turned into desperate attempts to hold on to their remaining territories. The lack of a strong and charismatic leader to rally the troops and strategize effectively left the English forces vulnerable and fragmented. Territories won through blood and sacrifice were gradually lost, each defeat further weakening Henry VI's grip on power and pushing England closer to the brink of despair. The war, which had once seemed winnable, now appeared to be an insurmountable challenge. Henry II's reign, marred by the losses and the ongoing conflict, became a period of great turmoil and uncertainty for England. As the war in France slipped through his fingers, Henry VI's mental state deteriorated. He was prone to periods of catatonia, withdrawing into himself for weeks at a time, leaving England effectively leaderless. Whispers of madness followed him like shadows, further eroding the already fragile confidence in his rule. These periods of mental incapacitation left a dangerous power vacuum in the English court. Ambitious nobles, sensing weakness at the heart of the monarchy, began to jostle for power and influence. This period of uncertainty and fear further destabilized the kingdom, paving the way for the bitter internecine conflict that would soon engulf England. Henry VI's mental fragility, coupled with his inability to provide decisive leadership, turned him into a puppet king. He became a pawn in the hands of ambitious nobles, each seeking to manipulate the feeble monarch for their own ends. The king, who should have been the unifier, became a symbol of division and discord, a tragic figurehead presiding over a kingdom teetering on the edge of an abyss. Section 4. The House Divided. Seeds of Discord and the Rise of York. Amidst the turmoil of Henry VI's reign, a new threat to the crown emerged from within the ranks of the nobility. Richard of York, a powerful and ambitious magnate, descended from a rival branch of the royal family, saw an opportunity in the king's weakness. York, a shrewd and ruthless political operator, began to gather support, positioning himself as a potential alternative to the failing king. The rivalry between the houses of Lancaster and York, both with claims to the throne, had long simmered beneath the surface of English politics. Henry VI, with his weak grasp on power and questionable legitimacy due to his periods of incapacity, inadvertently fanned the flames of this rivalry into a raging inferno. Richard of York, initially cautious in his challenge to the crown, gradually grew bolder as Henry VI's grip on power faltered. He gathered allies amongst the discontented nobles, promising stability and strong leadership. York presented himself as a savior, a man capable of restoring order to a kingdom teetering on the brink of anarchy. Section 5. The Lion and the Eagle. A clash of wills, a kingdom broken. The simmering tensions between the Lancastrian loyalists and the Yorkist faction led by the ambitious Richard of York, finally erupted into open warfare in 1455. This conflict was not just a simple power struggle, it was a clash of ideologies, ambitions, and deeply rooted grievances. The Lancastrians, loyal to King Henry VI, believed in the divine right of their monarch, while the Yorkists, feeling marginalized and wronged, sought to assert their own claim to the throne. The First Battle of St. Albans, a brutal and bloody encounter, marked the beginning of the Wars of the Roses, a decades-long dynastic struggle that would tear England apart. This battle was not just a military engagement, but a signal to the entire kingdom that the old order was crumbling. The streets of St. Albans ran red with the blood of noblemen and common soldiers alike, setting a grim precedent for the conflicts to come. The Wars of the Roses were a departure from the chivalric ideals of warfare that had once characterized English conflicts. The battles were no longer governed by the codes of honor and chivalry that had previously defined medieval combat. Instead, they were marked by treachery, betrayal, and a ruthless pursuit of power. The very fabric of English society was being torn apart as noble families chose sides and turned against each other. It was a brutal and unforgiving civil war where brother fought brother and cousin fought cousin, all for the prize of the English throne. Families were divided, friendships shattered, and the bonds of loyalty tested to their breaking point. The war brought out the worst in men, as ambition and the thirst for power overshadowed any sense of kinship or duty. No quarter was given, no mercy shown, as the two sides clashed in a series of bloody encounters. The battles were fierce and unrelenting, with neither side willing to back down. The fields of England became killing grounds where the only rule was survival of the fittest. The brutality of the conflict left deep scars on the land and its people, scars that would take generations to heal. Henry VI, a man of peace thrust onto the bloody stage of war, was ill-equipped to lead his forces to victory. His gentle nature and indecisiveness made him a poor wartime leader. He watched helplessly as his kingdom descended into chaos, unable to muster the strength or resolve needed to turn the tide. His reign, once filled with promise, became a tragic tale of missed opportunities and unfulfilled potential. He became a spectator to his own downfall, his reign collapsing around him as the House of York, led by the ruthless Richard, gained the upper hand. Richard's ambition knew no bounds, and he seized every opportunity to weaken the Lancastrian hold on the throne. The once mighty Lancastrian dynasty was brought to its knees, its power and influence eroded by the relentless Yorkist advance. The once proud Kingdom of England became a battleground, its fields soaked in the blood of its own sons. The war left a legacy of devastation and loss, with entire regions laid to waste and countless lives lost. The Wars of the Roses were not just a series of battles, they were a national tragedy that reshaped the course of English history. The echoes of this conflict would be felt for generations, a stark reminder of the cost of ambition and the fragility of peace. James II was born in 1633 during a time of great turmoil in England. His father, Charles I, was king, but the country was divided by religion. Charles I believed in the divine right of kings, the idea that kings get their power from God. Many people disagreed with this and wanted more power for Parliament. This led to a civil war which the parliamentarians ultimately won. Charles I was executed in 1649 and England became a republic for a short time. James and his brother Charles had to flee England for their safety. They spent their teenage years in exile in France. This experience had a profound impact on James. He saw how powerful the Catholic Church was in France, and he became increasingly drawn to Catholicism. This was a problem, as England was a predominantly Protestant country. In 1660, the monarchy was restored in England, and James's brother became King Charles II. James returned to England with him. He was a popular figure at court, known for his charm and good looks. He was also a skilled soldier and naval commander. In 1660, James married Anne Hyde, the daughter of a prominent politician. The marriage was controversial because Anne was a commoner. However, Charles II approved of the match, and Anne proved to be a loyal and supportive wife to James. James's conversion to Catholicism in the 1670s caused a great deal of anxiety in England. Many people feared that he would try to return England to Catholicism if he ever became king. James was a devout Catholic, and he made no secret of his faith. He even set up a private chapel in his palace where he could worship freely. This angered many Protestants, who saw it as a sign that James was not loyal to the Church of England. Despite the controversy over his religion, James remained a powerful figure in English politics. He was the heir to the throne, and he had the support of his brother, the king. James was also a popular figure with the army and navy, which gave him a great deal of influence. In 1685, Charles II died without a legitimate heir. This meant that James, as Charles's younger brother, was next in line for the throne. He became King James II of England and King James VII of Scotland. His accession was met with mixed reactions. Some people were willing to give him a chance, hoping that he would moderate his religious views now that he was king. Others were deeply suspicious of him and feared that he would try to impose Catholicism on the country. James II's reign started peacefully enough. However, it soon became clear that he was determined to promote Catholicism in England. He believed in the absolute power of the monarch and felt that his subjects should not question his decisions, especially regarding religion. This put him at odds with Parliament, which was largely Protestant and believed in the limitations of the monarchy. One of James II's most controversial moves was his appointment of Catholics to high positions in the government, the army, and the church. This was a direct violation of English law, which required all government officials to be members of the Church of England. James argued that he had the right to appoint whomever he wanted to these positions, but his actions angered many Protestants. James II also tried to win over Protestants to Catholicism. He issued a declaration of indulgence, which granted religious freedom to all Christians, including Catholics. This was a radical move, as it effectively overturned centuries of persecution against Catholics in England. However, the declaration was also seen as a threat to the Protestant establishment, and it was met with widespread opposition. James II's attempts to promote Catholicism in England were a failure. The majority of the English people were fiercely Protestant, and they were not willing to convert to Catholicism. James's actions only served to alienate his Protestant subjects and to unite them in opposition to his rule. In the early years of his reign, James II faced a number of challenges. There were several plots and rebellions against him, mainly motivated by opposition to his pro-Catholic policies. One notable uprising was the Monmouth Rebellion, led by James Scott, the Duke of Monmouth, an illegitimate son of Charles II. Monmouth presented himself as a Protestant alternative to James II. He landed in England with a small force and attempted to raise a rebellion against James. However, his rebellion was quickly crushed and Monmouth was executed. Despite these challenges, James II continued to pursue his pro-Catholic agenda. He believed that it was his God-given right to rule as he saw fit, and that his subjects had no right to question his authority. This put him increasingly at odds with Parliament, which saw its role as protecting the rights of the people. Tensions between James II and Parliament grew over time. Parliament was angered by James's attempts to bypass them and rule without their consent. They were also concerned about his growing army, which they saw as a threat to their liberty. Section 5. Growing tensions and rebellions. As James II continued to push for Catholic tolerance and expand his power, opposition to his rule intensified. The birth of his son, James Francis Edward Stuart, in 1688 proved to be a turning point. Until then, the throne would have passed to his Protestant daughter Mary, but the arrival of a Catholic male heir raised the possibility of a Catholic dynasty in England, a prospect that deeply alarmed the Protestant majority. James II's attempts to control the Church of England also backfired. He tried to force the clergy to read his Declaration of Indulgence, which granted religious freedom to Catholics from their pulpits. This was met with widespread resistance, as many clergymen saw it as a violation of their conscience. The trial of the 7 bishops who refused to comply with the king's order to read the Declaration of Indulgence became a focal point of opposition to James II. The bishops were arrested and charged with seditious libel, but were acquitted by a jury, demonstrating the depth of popular resistance to James's policies. This event further eroded James's authority and emboldened his opponents. Section 6. The Invitation and the Glorious Revolution. With the English people increasingly alienated by James II's policies, a group of prominent Protestant lords took a drastic step. They secretly sent a letter to William of Orange, the stadtholder of the Dutch Republic and James II's nephew and son-in-law, inviting him to invade England and take the throne. William was married to James's daughter Mary, who was the Protestant heir to the throne before the birth of James's Catholic son. William of Orange, a staunch Protestant and a strong opponent of Louis XIV of France, saw an opportunity to prevent a Catholic dynasty in England and to bring England into his coalition against France. He landed in England in November 1688 with a substantial army. William's arrival sparked the Glorious Revolution. James II had miscalculated the mood of the country and the army. He found himself largely without support as many of his troops defected to William. Realizing that he could not count on the loyalty of his army, James II panicked. He made a half-hearted attempt to resist William's invasion, but his efforts were disorganized and ineffective. To Section 7, James II's flight and exile. As William of Orange's forces advanced, James II, abandoned by his supporters and fearing for his safety, fled to France with his wife and infant son. His flight was seen by many as an admission of defeat and an abdication of the throne. He attempted to escape to France, throwing the Great Seal of the realm into the River Thames in a futile attempt to disrupt the government. James was captured in Kent, but William of Orange allowed him to escape to France. William did not want to make James a martyr for the Catholic cause, and he knew that James would be less of a threat to his rule if he was in exile. James II was welcomed in France by his cousin Louis XIV, who provided him with a palace and a pension. He lived out the rest of his days in exile, plotting to regain his throne but never succeeding. He made one attempt to invade England in 1690 with the help of the Irish Jacobites, but he was defeated at the Battle of the Boyne. Section 8. The aftermath of the Revolution. In England, William of Orange and his wife, Mary, were crowned joint monarchs in 1689. The Glorious Revolution, as it came to be known, marked a turning point in English history. It established the supremacy of Parliament over the monarch and ensured that England would remain a Protestant nation. Parliament passed the Bill of Rights in 1689, which limited the power of the monarch and guaranteed certain rights to English citizens. This document is still in effect today and is considered to be one of the most important documents in British history. The Glorious Revolution had a profound impact on the development of democracy in England. It established the principle that the monarch ruled only with the consent of Parliament, and it paved the way for the development of a constitutional monarchy. Section 9. The legacy of James II. James II is a controversial figure in English history. He was a devout Catholic who was determined to promote his faith, even if it meant alienating his Protestant subjects. He was also a stubborn and inflexible ruler who refused to compromise with his opponents. His reign was short and tumultuous, ending in his humiliating flight from his own country. Despite his failures, James II was not without his supporters. Some historians argue that he was a well-intentioned ruler who was simply trying to do what he thought was best for his country. They point to his attempts to promote religious tolerance and to reform the English government. However, most historians agree that James II's reign was a disaster for England. His attempts to impose Catholicism on a Protestant nation led to widespread unrest and ultimately to his downfall. The Glorious Revolution that overthrew him was a watershed moment in English history, marking the end of absolute monarchy and the beginning of a new era of constitutional government. History remembers its villains, often with morbid fascination. We tell tales of their follies, their excesses, their sheer incompetence. But what of those who wore the crown, yet stumbled on the field of battle? Those whose reigns were marked not by triumph, but by the bitter sting of defeat. These kings made mistakes, but how did they perform on the battlefield? Were they hapless commanders, outmaneuvered and outmatched? Or did their failings lie in the decisions made far from the clash of steel, decisions that sealed their fates long before the first arrow was loosed? Join us now as we journey back in time to witness the epic fails of bad kings on the battlefield. Prepare to witness the clash of armies, the roar of cannons, and the weight of history hanging in the balance. The year is 1314. Scotland, a land of rugged beauty and fierce independence, is locked in a struggle for survival against its powerful southern neighbour, England. Edward II, King of England, sits astride his war-horse, a figure of authority clad in polished armour. He has come north with a mighty army to crush the rebellion led by the charismatic Robert the Bruce. Edward's banners flutter in the wind, a colourful tapestry of lions and crosses, a symbol of English might. His army, a force of over 20,000 men, stretches out behind him like a steel serpent, bristling with weapons and determined to crush the Scottish resistance. Across the field, Robert the Bruce surveys his own army, a smaller, more ragged force, but one united by a fierce love for their homeland. They're outnumbered, outmatched in equipment, but not in spirit. The air crackles with tension as the two armies prepare for the clash. The fate of Scotland hangs in the balance. Edward, confident in his superior numbers, orders his knights to charge. It is a decision that will seal his fate and change the course of Scottish history. The English knights, weighed down by their heavy armour, thunder across the boggy ground. But the Scots are ready. They have chosen their battlefield well, a narrow, marshy plain that negates the English advantage in cavalry. The Scots, wielding long spears, form a tight formation known as a schiltron, an impenetrable wall of steel. The English cavalry crashes into the Scottish lines, but their charge is broken. The ground, churned to mud by the hooves of thousands of horses, becomes a death trap for the heavily armoured knights. Edward, watching from afar, is aghast. His carefully planned attack has descended into chaos. Bruce, sensing opportunity, unleashes his own fierce warriors. The Scottish infantry, armed with axes and swords, tears into the disorganized English ranks. Panic spreads through the English army. Edward, surrounded by his bodyguard, is forced to flee, leaving his army to its fate. The day is a resounding victory for the Scots, a testament to Bruce's leadership and the courage of his warriors. Edward, humiliated and defeated, retreats south, his dreams of conquest shattered on the field of Bannockburn. The defeat will forever tarnish his reputation, a stark reminder of the price of arrogance and underestimation. Bannockburn becomes a rallying cry for Scottish patriots, a symbol of their enduring spirit and their refusal to bow to English domination. It is a victory forged in blood and mud, a testament to the human cost of war and the enduring power of national pride. The year is 1453. A generation has passed since the mud and blood of Bannockburn. Across the English Channel, another king faces his own fateful battle. Henry VI, a pious and well-intentioned ruler, but one plagued by bouts of madness and indecision, finds himself embroiled in the final throes of the 100 Years' War. The once mighty English war machine, which had dominated France for decades, is now a shadow of its former self. The French, inspired by the legendary Joan of Arc, have rallied and are on the offensive, determined to drive the English from their lands. The setting for this pivotal clash is the town of Castillon, strategically located in Gascony, a region long held by the English. Henry, or rather, his advisors, for the king himself is far away, lost in a world of shadows and whispers, have decided to make a stand here. The English army, a mix of veteran soldiers and inexperienced levies, hunkers down behind makeshift defences. They are outnumbered, outgunned, and facing a French army invigorated by a string of victories. The French, led by the cunning and ambitious Jean Bureau, a master of artillery, arrive at Castillon and lay siege to the town. Bureau, recognizing the changing face of warfare, has brought with him a fearsome new weapon, cannons. These are not the clumsy bombards of old, slow to reload and inaccurate. These are smaller, more mobile guns capable of firing deadly volleys of iron shot. The English, accustomed to the clash of swords and the hail of arrows, have never seen such weapons before. The French guns open fire, the ground trembling beneath the thunderous roar. Stone walls crumble under the relentless bombardment, and English soldiers are cut down by the deadly hail of iron. Henry, oblivious to the unfolding disaster, remains secluded in his distant castle, lost in prayer and delusion. On the battlefield, his commanders, lacking clear orders and facing overwhelming firepower, fight bravely, but in vain. The French, sensing victory, storm the shattered English defences. The Battle of Castillon becomes a rout. Thousands of English soldiers are killed, captured, or scattered. The dream of an English empire in France, a dream that had cost so much blood and treasure, lies in ruins. Castillon marks a turning point in military history. It is a victory of gunpowder over steel, of modern tactics over medieval chivalry. For Henry VI, it is a disaster of epic proportions, a defeat that shatters his already fragile grip on power. The 100 Years' War, which had ravaged France for over a century, finally staggers to an end. The English, driven from the continent, lick their wounds and retreat across the Channel, their dreams of conquest shattered. With Chapter 3, The Boyne's Bitter Waters. The year is 1690. The scene shifts to the Emerald Isle, Ireland, a land steeped in ancient history and riven by religious and political strife. Here, on the banks of the River Boyne, another king faces his destiny. James II of England, Ireland and Scotland, a staunch Catholic in a predominantly Protestant kingdom, has been deposed by his own daughter and son-in-law in the Glorious Revolution. He has fled to Ireland, seeking to regain his throne with the support of Catholic France. Facing him is his nephew and rival, William of Orange, a Protestant champion called upon by the English Parliament to defend their liberties and religion. The two armies, mirror images of a divided kingdom, prepare for a battle that will decide the fate of three nations. James, though a seasoned soldier, is hampered by a lack of decisiveness and a tendency to trust in unreliable allies. He has at his back the Irish Catholic army, fighting for their king and their faith, but they are poorly equipped and lacking in discipline. William, a stern and calculating leader, commands a force of seasoned professionals, bolstered by contingents from across Protestant Europe. He is determined to crush James's rebellion and secure his own precarious hold on the English throne. The two armies clash on a sweltering July day. The Boyne, sluggish and brown, becomes the focal point of a brutal struggle. Cannon fire rips through the ranks and muskets flash in the summer heat. James, watching the battle unfold from a safe distance, hesitates. He has a chance to rally his wavering Irish troops, to turn the tide of battle, but he is plagued by doubts, by the fear of another defeat that would shatter his hopes forever. William, sensing his opponent's weakness, leads a cavalry charge across the river, his orange sash a rallying point for his men. The Irish, lacking the leadership and discipline to withstand the onslaught, begin to waver. James, seeing his hopes crumble, panics. He turns and flees the field, leaving his loyal Irish supporters to face the enemy alone. His flight is a betrayal that will forever tarnish his name in Irish history. The Battle of the Boyne is a resounding victory for William of Orange, cementing his grip on the English throne and securing the Protestant ascendancy in Ireland. For James, it is the final humiliation, a defeat that shatters his dreams of restoration. The Boyne becomes a potent symbol in Irish history, a reminder of English domination and the enduring struggle for Irish independence. It is a battle that still resonates today, a testament to the enduring power of religion and politics to divide and conquer. And so we see that even in the theatre of war, where courage and decisiveness are paramount, the failings of a leader can have profound consequences. These kings, each flawed in their own way, met their destinies on battlefields far from the gilded cages of their palaces. Their stories serve as a reminder that leadership is not a birthright, but a heavy burden, one that demands not only strength of arms, but also clarity of vision and a deep understanding of the human cost of conflict. The echoes of these battles still resonate through time, reminding us that the course of history is often shaped not by grand designs, but by the decisions made or not made in the heat of the moment. Power, it's the driving force of nature, the ultimate prize that governs the animal kingdom. And in the realm of human history, nowhere is this struggle for power more evident than within the walls of palaces. For centuries, kings have waged wars, crushed rebellions, and ruled with an iron fist. But even kings weren't safe from betrayal. Some of their worst enemies were their own wives. In this exploration of history's dark underbelly, we journey back in time to uncover the stories of three remarkable women: Isabella of France, Margaret of Anjou, and Mary of Modena. These were not mere queens content to sit idly by their husbands' sides. These were women of ambition, of cunning, and of unwavering resolve. Driven by a potent mix of love, duty, and a thirst for power, they would defy expectations and forever alter the course of their nation's destinies. Prepare to delve into the captivating tales of royal betrayal, where love and loyalty were but pawns in a deadly Game of Thrones. Our journey begins in 14th century England, a kingdom teetering on the brink of chaos. The land is rife with political intrigue, and the air is thick with the scent of rebellion. King Edward II, a ruler more interested in the arts and the affections of his male favourites than the burdens of kingship, sits upon a throne of thorns. His court is a place of decadence and favouritism, where loyalty is bought and sold. His queen, Isabella of France, a woman of extraordinary beauty and intellect, watches as her husband's reign crumbles around them. She is a foreigner in a hostile land, her every move scrutinized by a suspicious court. Married at a young age, Isabella had initially tried to be a dutiful wife. She had hoped to find love and partnership in her marriage, but those dreams were quickly dashed. But Edward's blatant favoritism towards his advisors, particularly Piers Gaveston, filled her with resentment. Gaveston was more than just a favorite. He was a symbol of everything wrong with Edward's reign. Gaveston's influence over the king was absolute, a constant humiliation to Isabella, who found herself increasingly isolated and powerless. She was a queen in name only, her authority undermined at every turn. The years passed, and Isabella bore Edward 4 children, securing the royal lineage. Her children were her only solace, a reminder of her duty and her legacy, yet the rift between them only widened. Edward's neglect and Isabella's growing bitterness created an unbridgeable chasm. When Edward's blatant disregard for his queen became a matter of public scandal, Isabella realized the precariousness of her position. She knew that she had to act not just for herself, but for her children and the future of the kingdom. Her son, the heir to the throne, was in danger, his birthright threatened by Edward's reckless actions. Isabella's maternal instincts and political acumen converged, driving her to take drastic measures. The turning point came with the arrival of Roger Mortimer, a charismatic and ambitious baron, exiled by Edward for his rebellious nature. Mortimer was a man of action, a stark contrast to the ineffectual king. Mortimer and Isabella found common ground in their hatred for the king and soon became lovers, their alliance fueled by a shared desire for revenge. Their relationship was both a personal and political partnership, each strengthening the other's resolve. With Mortimer as her champion, Isabella gathered a force in France, landing on English shores with the young prince at her side. It was a bold move, one that would change the course of English history. The people, weary of Edward's misrule, flocked to her banner. They saw in Isabella a beacon of hope, a leader who could restore order and justice. The once powerful king, abandoned and alone, was captured and forced to abdicate in favor of his son. It was a dramatic fall from grace, a testament to the power of Isabella's resolve. Edward II met a grim end, his death shrouded in mystery. Some say he was murdered, others that he died of natural causes, but the truth remains elusive. Isabella, now known as the She-Wolf of France, had triumphed. Her victory was complete, her enemies vanquished. But her victory came at a cost. The weight of her actions and the bloodshed that followed weighed heavily on her conscience. The whispers of her ruthlessness and the shadow of Mortimer's ambition would forever taint her legacy. Isabella's story is one of power, betrayal, and the complex interplay of love and politics. From the tumultuous reign of Edward II, we move to the battlefields of the Wars of the Roses, a brutal dynastic struggle that would tear England apart, pitting the houses of Lancaster and York against each other in a series of bloody conflicts. At the heart of this conflict stood Margaret of Anjou, a queen who refused to be a mere pawn in the hands of fate. Her story is one of resilience and unyielding determination. Married to Henry VI, a man plagued by bouts of madness, Margaret found herself thrust into the maelstrom of English politics. Her husband's mental instability left a power vacuum that she was determined to fill. While her husband retreated into his delusions, Margaret, a woman of fierce intelligence and unwavering ambition, took the reins of power. She navigated the treacherous waters of the English court with skill and tenacity. She became the true ruler of England, defending her husband's throne and her son's birthright against the relentless Yorkist faction. Her leadership was both a beacon of hope and a target for her enemies. With unwavering determination, she rallied her forces, negotiated alliances, and even rode into battle, her courage inspiring her troops. Margaret's presence on the battlefield was a testament to her indomitable spirit. Margaret's reign was a relentless struggle for survival. Every day was a battle not just against the Yorkists, but against the very fabric of a society that often underestimated her. Betrayal lurked around every corner, and her enemies, sensing weakness in Henry's condition, grew bolder. The court was a nest of vipers, each one waiting for the right moment to strike. Yet she fought on, her spirit unbroken, her resolve unyielding. Margaret's determination was a force of nature, driving her to protect her family and her legacy. Tragically, Margaret's valiant efforts were ultimately in vain. The tides of war turned against her, and the cost of her defiance was steep. The Yorkists, led by the cunning Richard of York, gained the upper hand. Their strategic maneuvers and relentless pursuit of power proved too much for Margaret's forces. Henry VI was deposed, his reign cut short, and Margaret was forced to flee into exile with her son. The fall of her house was a devastating blow. Even in defeat, Margaret of Anjou remained a formidable figure. Her spirit, though battered, was never broken. Her unwavering loyalty to her husband, her fierce love for her son, and her indomitable spirit in the face of overwhelming odds cemented her place as one of history's most remarkable queens. Margaret of Anjou's legacy is a testament to the strength and resilience of a woman who refused to be defeated. Chapter 3: Mary of Modena, Exile and the Price of Faith. Our final story takes us to the court of James II, the last Catholic king of England. His reign was marked by religious tension and political strife, a turbulent period that would ultimately reshape the nation's future. James, a devout believer in the divine right of kings, ascended the throne amidst a wave of anti-Catholic sentiment. His unwavering commitment to his faith and his belief in his divine right to rule set him on a collision course with the predominantly Protestant nation. By his side stood his queen Mary of Modena, a woman of deep faith and unwavering loyalty. Her presence was a source of strength for James, and her own convictions would be tested in the years to come. Mary, a devout Catholic in a predominantly Protestant nation, faced suspicion and hostility from the moment she set foot on English soil. Her foreign origins and her faith made her an easy target for those who opposed the king. Her marriage to James, a widower twice her age, had been one of political expediency, but she grew to love him deeply. Their union, though initially strategic, blossomed into a genuine partnership bound by mutual respect and shared faith. When James's religious policies sparked rebellion, Mary stood by him without hesitation. Her loyalty was unwavering, even as the kingdom teetered on the brink of chaos. She used her influence to rally support for her husband, her unwavering faith a stark contrast to the growing unrest that gripped the nation. Her efforts, though valiant, could not quell the rising tide of opposition. The birth of their son, James Francis Edward, heightened the tensions. The prospect of a Catholic heir to the throne was a catalyst for further dissent. The prospect of a Catholic dynasty on the English throne proved too much for the Protestant establishment. Fear and resentment festered, leading to a series of events that would change the course of history. The seeds of revolution were sown. Plots and conspiracies began to take shape as those opposed to James sought to remove him from power. Faced with invasion by his own nephew, William of Orange, James faltered. The pressure mounted, and the king found himself in an increasingly untenable position. It was Mary, ever the pragmatist, who urged him to flee, to live and fight another day. Her foresight and determination were crucial in their decision to escape. She understood that their survival and the future of their son's claim to the throne depended on it. The escape was perilous, fraught with danger and uncertainty. Their escape, fraught with danger and intrigue, marked the end of James II's reign and the beginning of the Glorious Revolution. It was a turning point that would redefine the monarchy and the nation's religious landscape. Forced into exile, Mary and James watched as William and Mary ascended the throne. The new Protestant rulers were celebrated, while the deposed king and queen faced an uncertain future. Though she lived the rest of her days in exile, Mary of Modena never relinquished her faith or her belief in her son's right to rule. Her resilience in the face of adversity was a testament to her character. Her story serves as a poignant reminder of the power of conviction and the enduring strength of a mother's love. Mary of Modena's legacy is one of faith, loyalty, and the unyielding hope for her son's rightful place on the throne. The stories of Isabella, Margaret, and Mary offer a glimpse into the complex and often brutal realities of power. These were not women content to remain in the shadows. They were wives, mothers, and queens who dared to challenge the established order, their actions sending shockwaves through history. Their legacies, etched in the annals of time, serve as a testament to the enduring power of human ambition, the complexities of love and loyalty, and the profound impact that even a single individual can have on the course of history. As we reflect on their stories, we are reminded that the past is never truly gone. It lives on in the echoes of their choices, the consequences of their actions, and the enduring power of their stories passed down through generations. Throughout history, the delicate balance between a ruler and their subjects has often tipped into turmoil. When kings fail their people, the people rise up. From the sun-drenched plains of Africa, where lions battle for dominance, to the intricate societies of our closest primate relatives, the quest for power is an enduring drama, and so it is within the story of humanity itself. Join us now as we journey back in time to medieval England, a realm simmering with discontent where the seeds of rebellion are sown and the very foundations of power are shaken. The reign of King John, commencing in the year 1199, would prove to be a tumultuous period in England's history. John, a monarch known for his ruthlessness and avarice, inherited a kingdom already burdened by the costs of war. To replenish his coffers and fund his ambitious campaigns, John levied heavy taxes upon his barons, the powerful lords who formed the backbone of the realm. These taxes, often arbitrary and exorbitant, were met with growing resentment. The barons, accustomed to a certain degree of autonomy and consultation in matters of governance, saw John's actions as a betrayal of their ancient rights. As the king's demands grew ever more oppressive, the flames of rebellion began to flicker. In 1215, these flames erupted into open revolt. A confederation of barons, their patience exhausted, rose up against their king. They marched on London, their ranks swelled by disaffected knights and commoners who shared their grievances. John, faced with this unprecedented challenge to his authority, was compelled to negotiate. At a meadow known as Runnymede, on the banks of the River Thames, king and rebels met. The outcome of this historic encounter was the Magna Carta, a document that would forever alter the course of English history. The Magna Carta, meaning Great Charter, enshrined certain fundamental rights, limiting the king's power and safeguarding the liberties of his subjects. It established that even the king was subject to the law, a radical concept for the time. The signing of the Magna Carta marked a pivotal moment in the evolution of democracy. It was a testament to the power of collective action, a demonstration that even the most absolute of rulers could be held accountable by the will of the people. Though its immediate impact was limited, the Magna Carta would serve as a potent symbol for centuries to come, a beacon of hope in the struggle against tyranny. It laid the groundwork for the development of parliamentary democracy in England, a system of governance that would eventually spread throughout the world. John, however, had no intention of honouring the agreement he had made under duress. As soon as the opportunity arose, he renounced the Magna Carta, plunging England back into civil war. The conflict raged on until John's death in 1216, leaving his young son Henry III to inherit the throne. Though the Magna Carta was reissued during Henry's reign, it was not until much later that its principles were fully embraced and enshrined in English law. The legacy of King John's reign is a complex one. He is remembered as a tyrant, a ruler who sought to impose his will upon his subjects without regard for their rights or welfare. Yet his very excesses, his flagrant abuses of power, served as a catalyst for profound political change. The Magna Carta, born out of conflict and compromise, stands as a testament to the enduring human desire for freedom and justice. It is a reminder that power, when unchecked, can corrupt, and that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. The year 1381 witnessed an unprecedented event in English history, the Peasants' Revolt. This tumultuous uprising, sparked by an oppressive tax and fueled by decades of simmering discontent, shook the foundations of medieval society. At its heart lay the poll tax, a per-head levy imposed by King Richard II to fund his costly wars in France. This tax, unlike previous levies, fell equally upon every adult, regardless of their means. For the peasantry, already struggling to survive, the poll tax proved to be the final straw. The revolt erupted in the spring of 1381, ignited by a dispute over tax collection in the village of Fobbing, Essex. From this small spark, the flames of rebellion spread rapidly across southern England. Peasants armed with makeshift weapons rose up against their landlords and tax collectors. They marched on London, their numbers swelling with each passing day. The rebels, led by Wat Tyler, John Ball and Jack Straw, demanded an end to the poll tax and a fairer distribution of wealth. Their grievances resonated with a broad swathe of society, from artisans to disaffected priests. The revolt quickly transformed into a mass movement, challenging the feudal order. Richard II, a young and inexperienced king, found himself overwhelmed by the scale of the uprising. He agreed to meet with the rebels at Mile End, where he promised to abolish the poll tax. However, the violence continued, culminating in a confrontation at Smithfield where Wat Tyler was killed. The death of Tyler only served to further inflame the rebels. Richard showed remarkable courage and political acumen. He rode out to meet the rebels once more, promising to be their leader and address their grievances. His words, combined with the swift suppression of the remaining rebel leaders, eventually succeeded in dispersing the crowds. The Peasants' Revolt was ultimately crushed, its leaders executed and its demands unmet. Yet its impact on English society was profound. It shattered the myth of peasant passivity, demonstrating the potential power of popular unrest. It forced the ruling class to confront the deep-seated inequalities that plagued medieval society, and it planted the seeds for future social and political reforms, albeit reforms that would take centuries to fully realize. The revolt also left an indelible mark on the young King Richard. His experiences during that tumultuous summer would shape his reign, instilling in him a deep suspicion of the masses and a determination to consolidate royal power. The Peasants' Revolt, a brutal and bloody chapter in English history, serves as a stark reminder of the volatile relationship between the governed and the governors. It is a testament to the human capacity for both oppression and resistance, and a cautionary tale about the consequences of ignoring the grievances of the powerless. Chapter 3, A Kingdom Divided, James II and the Protestant Wind. The reign of James II, the last Catholic monarch of England, Scotland and Ireland, was marked by religious and political turmoil that culminated in the Glorious Revolution of 1688. James, a devout Catholic in a predominantly Protestant nation, ascended the throne in 1685 amidst an atmosphere of suspicion and unease. His unwavering commitment to Catholicism, coupled with his autocratic tendencies, alienated large segments of the population, particularly the powerful Protestant elite. James's attempts to promote Catholicism within the church and state were met with stiff resistance. He appointed Catholics to key positions in government and the military, despite existing laws barring them from such offices. He issued declarations of indulgence granting religious freedom to Catholics and Protestant dissenters, a move widely seen as a blatant attempt to circumvent Parliament and erode the supremacy of the Church of England. The birth of James's son, James Francis Edward Stuart, in 1688 proved to be a turning point. The prospect of a Catholic dynasty on the English throne, feared and loathed by many Protestants, galvanized opposition to James's rule. Leading Protestant nobles, fearing for their religion and liberties, secretly invited William of Orange, James's Protestant son-in-law and stadtholder of the Dutch Republic, to invade England and claim the throne. William's landing in England, backed by a well-trained Dutch army, triggered a wave of defections from James's side. Prominent nobles, clergymen, and even members of his own family flocked to William's banner. James, facing overwhelming opposition and realizing the futility of resistance, fled to France, leaving the throne vacant. The relatively bloodless overthrow of James II, known as the Glorious Revolution, marked a watershed moment in British history. It established the principle of parliamentary supremacy over the monarchy, ensuring that no monarch could rule without the consent of Parliament. The Bill of Rights, enacted in 1689, further limited the power of the Crown, guaranteeing certain individual rights and freedoms. The Glorious Revolution also had profound religious implications. It solidified the Protestant character of the English state, enshrining the Protestant succession and ensuring the dominance of the Church of England. Catholics once again found themselves marginalized and subject to discriminatory laws. The religious tensions that had simmered for centuries would continue to shape British history for generations to come. James II's reign, though brief and turbulent, had a lasting impact on the British Isles. His attempts to reassert Catholic authority, while ultimately unsuccessful, triggered a series of events that redefined the relationship between the monarchy, Parliament and the people. The Glorious Revolution, a testament to the power of ideas and the enduring human desire for freedom of conscience, cemented England's path towards constitutional monarchy and parliamentary democracy. And so the tapestry of history unfolds, woven with threads of power, rebellion, and the enduring struggle for liberty. From the barons who challenged King John to the peasants who dared to defy Richard II, and the Protestants who rose up against James II, the message echoes through the ages: power unchecked will be challenged. The human spirit, when pushed to its limits, will rise up in defiance. These stories of rebellion, though set in a distant past, hold profound relevance for us today. They remind us that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, that the rights we cherish are not guaranteed, but hard-won and constantly under threat. As we navigate the complexities of our own time, let us draw inspiration from the courage and conviction of those who dared to challenge the status quo, who fought for a better future, and who in their own way shaped the world we live in today. Throughout history, the drama of power has played out on a grand stage. Kings and queens, emperors and empresses have risen to unimaginable heights, only to be brought low by the cruel hand of fate. But while some met their end on the field of battle, many more faced a far more sinister fate. Many of these kings didn't die in battle. They were betrayed, captured, or executed. In this series, we will journey back in time to explore the dark fates of betrayed monarchs. We will delve into the annals of history to uncover the stories of kings who were imprisoned, tortured, and murdered by those they trusted most. Their stories are a stark reminder that power is a fickle mistress, and that even the mightiest can fall victim to the treachery of others. Join us now as we uncover the secrets and scandals that led to the downfall of some of history's most powerful rulers. Richard II, King of England, ascended to the throne at the tender age of 10. His reign began with the promise of youth and the hope of a prosperous future. A boy king, surrounded by advisors, he inherited a kingdom already steeped in turmoil. The young monarch was heavily influenced by those around him, each with their own agendas and ambitions. As Richard matured, his reign became marked by controversy. His decisions often alienated the powerful nobles who once supported him. He made enemies of his nobles, challenging their power and asserting his own authority. His attempts to centralize power and bypass traditional noble privileges led to widespread discontent. Among those who felt the sting of Richard's ambition was his cousin Henry Bolingbroke. Bolingbroke, once a loyal supporter, found himself at odds with the king's increasingly autocratic rule. Banished by the king, Bolingbroke returned to England with a vengeance, rallying support and challenging Richard for the throne. His return was not just a personal vendetta, but a rallying cry for all those disillusioned with Richard's rule. The forces of king and cousin clashed, and Richard, outmaneuvered and abandoned by his allies, was forced to surrender. His once loyal supporters had turned their backs, leaving him isolated and vulnerable. Imprisoned within the imposing walls of Pontefract Castle, Richard faced a bleak and uncertain future. The castle, cold and foreboding, became his final residence. The crown, once his birthright, was now in the hands of his rival. The shift in power was swift and decisive, leaving Richard with little hope of reclaiming his throne. Henry Bolingbroke, now King Henry IV, could not allow Richard to live, a potential figurehead for rebellion. The threat of Richard's existence loomed over his newly established reign, yet the new king hesitated to order Richard's outright execution. The political ramifications of such an act were too great to ignore. The deposed king was still popular among some factions, and a brutal assassination could spark further unrest. The kingdom was already fragile, and any misstep could lead to chaos. Instead, a crueler, more insidious plan was hatched. The decision was made to let Richard's demise appear more natural, avoiding the direct blame of murder. Richard, once accustomed to the finest foods and lavish banquets, found himself deprived. The stark contrast between his past opulence and his current deprivation was a cruel twist of fate. Day by day, his meals dwindled, the portions meagre, the quality abysmal. The once plentiful feasts were replaced with scraps unfit for a king. He was slowly being starved, his body wasting away within the cold stone confines of his prison. The physical and psychological torment took its toll on the former king. Whether Richard succumbed entirely to starvation or was ultimately murdered outright remains a subject of historical debate. The true nature of his death is shrouded in mystery and speculation. Some accounts whisper of assassins, dispatched to hasten the deposed king's demise. These shadowy figures are said to have ensured that Richard would never pose a threat again. Others suggest that he, weakened and despairing, simply gave up the will to live. In the end, Richard's tragic fate serves as a poignant reminder of the perils of power and the fragility of human life. Edward II, a king plagued by accusations of weakness and impropriety, faced a rebellion led by his own queen, Isabella of France. His reign was fraught with challenges, both internal and external, that tested his resolve and leadership. His reign had been marked by political blunders and a controversial relationship with his favourite Piers Gaveston, which alienated many powerful nobles. This favouritism not only caused friction within the court, but also led to significant political instability. When Isabella, allied with the vengeful Roger Mortimer, invaded England, Edward's support crumbled around him. The invasion was swift and decisive, catching Edward off guard and leaving him with few loyal supporters. Captured and forced to abdicate in favour of his young son, Edward III, the deposed king was imprisoned, his fate hanging precariously in the balance. The young Edward III, though a child, was thrust into a position of immense power and responsibility. Moved from castle to castle, Edward became a pawn in a dangerous game of political intrigue. Each transfer was a reminder of his fallen status and the precarious nature of his existence. Rumors of his mistreatment spread like wildfire, whispers of torture reaching the ears of foreign courts. These rumors painted a grim picture of Edward's captivity, suggesting that his enemies were determined to make an example of him. The exact details of Edward's suffering remain shrouded in mystery, but historical accounts hint at a dark and brutal end. The lack of concrete evidence only fueled the speculation and horror surrounding his final days. One chronicler, writing shortly after Edward's death, described a gruesome scene. His account, though possibly exaggerated, has left a lasting impression on the historical narrative. The deposed king, held captive in Berkeley Castle, was murdered in a manner too horrific to detail, a red-hot poker the alleged instrument of his demise. This method of execution, if true, was designed to inflict maximum pain and humiliation. While the veracity of this account has been debated by historians, the fact remains that Edward II died under suspicious circumstances. The mystery surrounding his death has led to numerous theories and debates among scholars. His death, whether by brutal torture or a more merciful, yet still calculated murder, served the interests of the new regime. It was a clear message to any potential dissenters about the lengths to which the new rulers would go to maintain their power. The whispers of Edward's suffering served as a chilling reminder to any who dared challenge the authority of the new monarchs. These stories were not just tales of cruelty, but also warnings of the consequences of defiance. His reign and its brutal end became a cautionary tale, a stark illustration of the dangers of royal weakness and the ruthlessness of political ambition. Edward's story is a testament to the volatile nature of medieval politics and the perilous life of a king. Henry VI, a pious and gentle soul, seemed ill-suited to the burdens of kingship. His reign was fraught with challenges that would test even the most capable of rulers. He inherited the throne amidst the bloody chaos of the Wars of the Roses, a dynastic struggle that pitted the House of Lancaster against the House of York. This brutal conflict saw families torn apart and loyalties tested as England was plunged into a prolonged period of instability and violence. Henry's reign was marked by periods of madness, leaving him vulnerable to the machinations of ambitious nobles. His mental health deteriorated, causing great concern among his supporters and providing opportunities for his enemies to exploit his weaknesses. His cousin, Richard of York, challenged his claim to the throne, plunging England deeper into the abyss of civil war. Richard's ambitions and strategic maneuvers further destabilized the kingdom, leading to a series of bloody battles and shifting alliances. Captured by the Yorkists, Henry was imprisoned in the Tower of London, a grim fortress that had witnessed the imprisonment and deaths of many before him. The Tower, with its cold stone walls and dark history, became a symbol of his tragic downfall. He became a pawn in a deadly game of power. His fate intertwined with the fortunes of war. The shifting tides of battle and political intrigue left him at the mercy of those who sought to control the throne. In 1471, as the Lancastrian forces rallied once more, Henry met his end within the Tower's forbidding walls. The resurgence of his supporters was short-lived, and the Tower became the final chapter in his tragic story. The official record declared his death to be of pure displeasure and melancholy, a convenient euphemism for murder. This vague and sanitized explanation did little to quell the rumors and suspicions surrounding his demise. Most historians believe that Henry was murdered on the orders of Edward IV, Richard of York's son, who now claimed the throne. Edward's ascent to power was marked by ruthless decisions, and eliminating Henry removed a significant obstacle to his rule. The method of his demise remains a subject of debate, with some accounts suggesting he was stabbed while at prayer. This act of violence, if true, would have been a stark contrast to Henry's pious nature, and further underscored the brutality of the times. Henry's death, shrouded in mystery and intrigue, marked a turning point in the Wars of the Roses. It signaled the end of an era and the beginning of a new phase in the conflict, with the Yorkists gaining the upper hand. The gentle king, a figurehead for peace and piety, was gone, leaving England in the grip of a new and ruthless king. The transition of power was complete, but the scars of the conflict would linger for generations to come. The stories of Richard II, Edward II, and Henry VI serve as a stark reminder of the precarious nature of power. These kings, once rulers of a mighty kingdom, met their ends not on the field of battle, but in the shadows of imprisonment and treachery. Their fates, brutal and tragic, highlight the dark side of human ambition. In their pursuit of power, their enemies resorted to deceit, imprisonment, and even murder, leaving an indelible stain on the pages of history. As we reflect on the lives and deaths of these betrayed kings, we are left to ponder the weight of the crown and the heavy price of power. Their stories serve as a timeless reminder that even in the highest echelons of society, trust can be broken, loyalty can be fleeting, and the quest for power can corrupt even the noblest of hearts. History remembers them for their failures, their tyrannical reigns, their disastrous decisions. England's worst kings, men who brought the nation to its knees. But what if their reigns of terror weren't just stories of destruction, but the unlikely catalysts for a stronger, freer England? Join us as we journey back through time to uncover the reigns of England's most infamous monarchs. We'll delve into the chaos and turmoil they unleashed. But more importantly, we'll examine how these periods of darkness inadvertently paved the way for a brighter future. From the signing of the Magna Carta, a document that would challenge the very notion of absolute power, to the tumultuous Wars of the Roses that reshaped the English dynasty, and finally to the glorious revolution which forever altered the relationship between the crown and its people. Prepare to see these infamous kings in a new light. Our journey begins in the 13th century with a king whose name has become synonymous with tyranny, King John. John's reign was plagued by conflict, both with his own barons and with foreign powers. He lost vast swathes of English territory in France, earning him the nickname John Lackland. John's relentless pursuit of funds to reclaim his lost lands led him to impose crushing taxes on his barons, pushing them to the brink of rebellion. In 1215, these powerful lords, weary of John's oppressive rule, rose up in defiance. They marched on London, forcing the beleaguered king to meet them at Runnymede, a meadow on the River Thames. It was here, under the watchful eyes of both sides, that King John, with a reluctant hand, affixed his seal to a document that would forever alter the course of English history, the Magna Carta. This great charter, though intended to quell a baronial uprising, contained within its parchment the seeds of something far more profound. The Magna Carta established, for the first time, the principle that even the king was subject to the law. It guaranteed certain fundamental rights to free men, including the right to a fair trial and protection from arbitrary imprisonment. These rights, revolutionary for their time, would become cornerstones of English common law, their influence echoing through the centuries. King John, desperate to cling to power, had unwittingly set in motion a chain of events that would chip away at the absolute authority of the monarchy. Though he would die a year later, his tumultuous reign left an indelible mark on England. The Magna Carta, a symbol of defiance against tyranny, became a beacon of hope, a testament to the enduring human desire for liberty and justice. The Magna Carta, however, was not an immediate victory for democracy. It was a document born of compromise, a fragile truce between a king and his rebellious barons. John himself, true to his nature, reneged on the agreement soon after signing it, plunging England into a bitter civil war. Yet, despite its turbulent beginnings, the Magna Carta's significance endured. It was reissued multiple times by subsequent kings, each iteration strengthening its principles and solidifying its place as a cornerstone of English law. The document became a powerful symbol invoked by generation after generation seeking to hold their rulers accountable. The seed of rebellion sown at Runnymede continued to germinate, slowly but surely taking root in the English psyche. It would take centuries, and the reign of many more ill-fated kings, for the principles enshrined in the Magna Carta to fully blossom into the constitutional monarchy we know today. But John's disastrous reign, far from being a footnote in history, had laid the groundwork for this transformation. He had, in his own way, contributed to the very system that would ultimately limit the power of his successors. From the tumultuous reign of King John, we fast forward to the 15th century, a period shrouded in the mists of legend and often romanticized in literature and film, the Wars of the Roses. This era, however, was far from romantic. It was a brutal, decades-long dynastic struggle that pitted cousin against cousin, family against family, all vying for control of the English throne. The seeds of this conflict were sown in the reign of Edward III, a king who had enjoyed unprecedented military success in France during the 100 Years' War. But Edward's long reign and the subsequent death of his heir created a power vacuum that would have devastating consequences. Upon Edward III's death, his grandson Richard II ascended the throne. Richard, however, proved to be a weak and unpopular ruler, alienating many powerful nobles with his autocratic tendencies. In a daring move, Richard's cousin, Henry Bolingbroke, Duke of Lancaster, seized power in 1399, deposing Richard and declaring himself King Henry IV. Thus began a new chapter in English history, one marked by instability and bloodshed. The House of Lancaster, represented by a red rose, and the House of York, symbolized by a white rose, laid claim to the throne. The ensuing conflict, known as the Wars of the Roses, would engulf England for the next 3 decades. The Wars of the Roses were a period of brutal battles, shifting alliances and ruthless power struggles. Kings were made and unmade on the battlefield, their reigns often cut short by violence or intrigue. The conflict reached its climax with the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485. On this fateful day, Richard III, the last Yorkist king, met his end at the hands of Henry Tudor, a distant Lancastrian claimant. Richard's death on the battlefield marked the end of the Plantagenet dynasty, a lineage that had ruled England for over 3 centuries. With Richard's demise, a new era dawned under the Tudor dynasty. Henry Tudor, crowned Henry VII, was a shrewd and calculating ruler. He understood that to secure his newfound power, he needed to heal the wounds of a divided nation. He married Elizabeth of York, daughter of Edward IV, uniting the warring houses and symbolically ending the Wars of the Roses. Henry's reign ushered in a period of relative peace and stability after decades of turmoil. He strengthened the monarchy, centralized power, and laid the foundation for the Tudor dynasty's golden age. The Wars of the Roses, though a period of immense suffering and loss, ultimately paved the way for a more unified and prosperous England. The conflict, in its own brutal way, had been a crucible from which a new dynasty emerged, one that would leave an indelible mark on England's history and identity. Chapter 3. The Glorious Revolution, a monarchy restrained. Our final chapter takes us to the 17th century, a period of immense intellectual and political upheaval across Europe. In England, James II, a Catholic monarch, ignited controversy, leading to the Glorious Revolution of 1688. His open Catholicism and autocratic tendencies alarmed the Protestant establishment. The birth of his Catholic son in 1688 threatened a Catholic dynasty. Protestant lords invited William of Orange and Mary to claim the throne. William landed with an army, leading to a bloodless coup. James fled to France, and Parliament offered the crown to William and Mary. The Glorious Revolution established parliamentary sovereignty and the Bill of Rights in 1689. It was a triumph for parliamentary democracy and a rejection of absolute monarchy. This revolution laid the foundation for England's constitutional monarchy. A legacy of unintended consequences. From the signing of the Magna Carta to the turmoil of the Wars of the Roses and the upheaval of the Glorious Revolution, we've seen how England's so-called worst kings, through their misjudgments and tyranny, inadvertently set in motion a chain of events that shaped a nation. Their reigns, though often marked by darkness and despair, ultimately illuminated the path towards a more just and equitable society. The legacy of these flawed monarchs is a testament to the unpredictable nature of history. Their failures, their struggles for power, and their inability to foresee the consequences of their actions ultimately contributed to the very system that would limit the power of their successors. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit, with its unyielding desire for freedom and justice, can find a way to flourish, and that sometimes the greatest leaps forward are born out of the most unexpected circumstances. The quest to crown England's worst king is a journey fraught with subjectivity. It's a path that winds through the annals of history, where each monarch's reign is a tapestry woven with both triumphs and tribulations. Worst implies a value judgment, a weighing of successes against failures on a scale. But how do we measure such things? Is it through the lens of military conquests, economic stability, or perhaps the welfare of the common people? Calibrated by our own modern sensibilities, our judgments are inevitably colored by the values and knowledge of our time. What we deem a failure today might have been seen as a necessary decision in the past, yet, to understand the kings of old, we must strive to shed the biases of our time and step into their world. We must immerse ourselves in the context of their era, where the rules of governance and the challenges they faced were vastly different from our own. We must consider the immense pressures they faced, the ever-shifting political landscapes they navigated, and the limited resources at their disposal. The constant threat of invasion, the need to maintain alliances, and the struggle to keep the nobility in check were daily concerns. To label a king worse requires a nuanced approach, one that acknowledges both the impact of their actions and the complexities of the historical context in which they rule. It demands a careful examination of their policies, their battles, and their personal choices. Did their reigns sow seeds of discord and instability? Were their decisions driven by personal ambition or the greater good? Did they fail to protect their people, leading to widespread suffering and discontent? Did their decisions result in the loss of lands, the suffering of their people, or the weakening of the crown's authority? These are the markers we must consider when evaluating their reigns. These are the questions that must guide our exploration. Only by delving deep into the past, with an open mind and a critical eye, can we hope to understand the true legacy of England's kings and determine who among them might be deemed the worst. History offers no shortage of contenders for the title of England's worst king. The annals of English royalty are replete with stories of rulers whose reigns were marked by controversy, conflict, and calamity. These monarchs, often remembered more for their failures than their successes, provide a fascinating glimpse into the complexities of leadership and the burdens of the crown. From the tumultuous early years of monarchy to the dawn of constitutional rule, the history of England is a tapestry woven with threads of ambition, betrayal, and power struggles. Each era brought its own challenges, and each king faced unique trials that tested their mettle and shaped the destiny of the nation. The pages of English history are filled with tales of ambition, intrigue, and misrule. These stories, preserved in ancient manuscripts and historical texts, offer a window into the lives of the kings and queens who once ruled the land. They reveal the human side of royalty with all its flaws and virtues. For the purpose of our inquiry, we will focus on three kings whose reigns have long been subject to scrutiny and debate: John, Edward II, and Henry VIII. These monarchs, each in their own way, exemplify the challenges and pitfalls of absolute power. John, the youngest son of Henry II, a king whose reign was marred by military failures, baronial rebellions, and the signing of the Magna Carta, a document that would become a cornerstone of constitutional governance. Edward II, a king overshadowed by his father's legacy. His reign was characterized by internal strife, favoritism, and ultimately his deposition and murder. His story is a tragic tale of a ruler who could not live up to the expectations placed upon him. And Henry VIII, a ruler whose thirst for power knew few bounds. His reign saw the break with the Catholic Church, the establishment of the Church of England, and a series of marriages that ended in annulments and executions. Henry's quest for a male heir and his ruthless methods left a lasting impact on the English monarchy. Each of these monarchs inherited a kingdom shaped by the successes and failures of their predecessors. Their reigns were a reflection of the times they lived in, marked by the political, social, and economic challenges of their eras. Each in turn left an indelible mark on the course of English history. Their actions, decisions, and policies influenced the direction of the nation and the lives of their subjects. The legacies of these kings continue to be studied and debated by historians and scholars. Their reigns, though separated by centuries, offer compelling case studies in the perils of absolute power, the complexities of leadership, and the enduring legacy of poor governance. By examining their lives and reigns, we gain a deeper understanding of the challenges faced by those who wear the crown and the impact of their rule on the course of history. The stories of John, Edward II, and Henry VIII serve as a reminder of the human side of history, where the ambitions and failings of individuals can shape the destiny of a nation. Their troubled reigns offer valuable lessons in leadership, power, and the consequences of misrule. John, crowned king in 1199, inherited a vast Angevin empire, stretching from the Scottish borders to the Pyrenees. However, his reign, far from building upon this legacy, became a study in how to squander an inheritance. John's ruthlessness earned him the enmity of his barons, culminating in the 1215 rebellion that forced him to seal the Magna Carta, a document that forever limited the power of the English crown. His military campaigns were disastrous, leading to the loss of Normandy and other French territories. His attempts to raise funds to reclaim these lands further alienated his barons, plunging England into civil war. John's reign serves as a stark reminder that ruthlessness, without the tempering influence of wisdom and strategic vision, is a recipe for disaster. Edward II, crowned in 1307, stands in stark contrast to his father, Edward I, a ruler known as the Hammer of the Scots. While his father was a formidable warrior and shrewd administrator, Edward II lacked the temperament and skills to govern effectively. His reign was plagued by military failures, most notably the catastrophic defeat at Bannockburn in 1314, which secured Scottish independence. Beyond his military blunders, Edward's reign was marred by his close relationships with favourites, particularly Piers Gaveston, which alienated his powerful barons. This ultimately led to his forced abdication in 1327 and his subsequent murder. Edward II's reign serves as a cautionary tale of a king ill-suited for the burdens of power, his weaknesses exploited by those seeking to advance their own agendas. The bloody reign of Henry VIII, a king consumed by ambition. Henry VIII, the second Tudor king, ascended the throne in 1509, inheriting a stable and prosperous kingdom. However, his reign, though marked by significant achievements, is indelibly stained by the brutality he unleashed to secure his own power and satisfy his desires. His break with the Roman Catholic Church, driven by his quest for a male heir, plunged England into religious turmoil. The executions of two of his 6 wives, Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, along with the executions of advisers who dared to oppose him, solidified his reputation as a tyrant, while Henry VIII strengthened the English monarchy and oversaw a period of significant cultural and artistic flourishing. His reign stands as a chilling reminder of the human cost of unchecked ambition. Section 6. Contextualizing kingship, power, politics, and the expectations of the throne. Evaluating kings solely on their failures risks overlooking the immense complexities of medieval and early modern kingship. These rulers were not merely individuals acting in isolation. They were central figures in a vast and intricate network of power dynamics, social expectations, and political pressures. Their decisions were influenced by a myriad of factors, including the advice of their counselors, the demands of their subjects, and the ever-shifting alliances with other noble families. Monarchs operated within a web of constraints, the ever-present threat of invasion, the delicate balance of power between the crown and the nobility, and the limitations imposed by rudimentary systems of taxation and administration. The constant need to defend their realm from external threats and internal rebellions required not only military prowess but also diplomatic skill. They had to navigate the treacherous waters of court politics where betrayal and intrigue were commonplace. Success or failure was often determined as much by chance and circumstance as by a king's own actions. A sudden outbreak of disease, a poor harvest, or an unexpected alliance between enemies could drastically alter the course of a reign. The unpredictability of medieval life meant that even the most capable and well-intentioned monarchs could find themselves facing insurmountable challenges. Moreover, the expectations of kingship evolved over time. What was once seen as a king's divine right to rule became increasingly questioned as new ideas about governance and justice emerged. The rise of legal systems, the spread of literacy, and the influence of philosophical and religious movements all contributed to changing perceptions of what it meant to be a good ruler. What might have been considered acceptable behavior in the 12th century, such as John's ruthlessness, became increasingly unacceptable in later centuries as notions of justice, governance, and the rule of law developed. The actions of a king were scrutinized not only by their contemporaries but also by future generations, who judged them according to evolving standards of morality and leadership. Therefore, any assessment of a king's badness must consider not only the immediate impact of their actions but also their long-term consequences and the evolving standards of their time. It is essential to understand the broader context in which these rulers operated, recognizing the constraints they faced and the complex interplay of factors that shaped their decisions. Only then can we form a more nuanced and accurate picture of their reigns. Section 7, Public Perception versus Historical Reality, Navigating the Shifting Sands of Opinion. Public perception of monarchs has always been fluid, shaped by propaganda, political agendas, and the passage of time. John, labelled Lackland and villainized in the popular imagination, was nonetheless a shrewd, if ruthless, ruler who faced extraordinary challenges. Edward II, often dismissed as a weak and incompetent ruler, was also a victim of circumstance and the machinations of his enemies. Henry VIII, often remembered for his 6 wives and his break with Rome, also laid the foundations for England's emergence as a major European power. The challenge for historians lies in disentangling the myths and legends that have accrued around these monarchs from the historical realities of their reigns. Section 8, the verdict rests with you, weighing the evidence and the passage of time. So, who wears the crown of England's worst king? Was it John, the tyrannical king who ignited rebellion and presided over the loss of English territories? Was it Edward II, the inept ruler who succumbed to courtly intrigue and paved the way for his own downfall? Or was it Henry VIII, the ruthless monarch who sacrificed countless lives on the altar of his own ambition? The answer ultimately lies with you, the reader. By carefully considering the evidence, weighing the historical context, and grappling with the complexities of leadership, you can arrive at your own verdict. Section 9, Beyond the Label, Understanding the Complexities of Kingship. The quest to identify England's worst king, while a fascinating historical exercise, should not obscure the broader point. Kingship, like all forms of leadership, is a complex and multifaceted endeavor. To truly understand these monarchs, we must move beyond simplistic labels and engage with the nuances of their reigns, their triumphs and failures, their virtues and their vices. Only then can we appreciate the profound impact these individuals had on the course of English history and gain a deeper understanding of the enduring legacy of the British monarchy.